Welcome back for our Rayelan Allan Members Archive from October the 17th. Rayelan is answering a question from a caller about the ego.
I started on the spiritual path thinking that I had no ego.
Right.
All I am is a creature here to serve my God and do what God wants me to do upon the planet. And let's just say that there were many things that hit me so low that people said you're like one of those blow-up dolls that has sand in the bottom. Somebody smashes you, you go all the way to the ground, and you bounce back up. Well, that was me. My husband died. I was smashed to the ground. Well, I bounced back up and went to New York. And then I got pneumonia. I was smashed to the ground, bounced back up, was offered this incredible job working for a senator, and went down to Virginia Beach to bid goodbye to my husband. And there, something happened to me that I later found out that was done to me purposefully, so I could not go to work for that senator. It was microwaves. It's a microwave weapon that was directed at my uterus, and my uterus just literally started bleeding, and I very easily could have bled to death. Well, anyway, I'm at home laying in bed for 2 months, like I lay in bed when I had the meningitis that, literally gave me, the ACM process and the Templar prosperity meditation. And so finally, when I get up and get out of it, my mother says, will you drive me and your niece up to Washington State? And so I agreed to. We stopped in Medford, where I met a man that I had known for about 13 years. And we put my mother to bed, or I put my mother to bed, and then I walked back to the bar that was in the hotel. And at the bar, I sat down with the naval officer that I knew, and we ordered our drinks. And there were a lot of strange things that happened in the bar. Like all the men in the bar started throwing things at us when we sat down. And he says, oh, those are just some men that work for me. Just don't pay any attention to them. They're all FBI. And I'm thinking, FBI? Why's a naval officer got FBI with him?
Right.
And so he told me that he was working as a U.S. attorney prosecuting a case out of Denver, and he was working out of Denver. And, of course, I had a friend that was being prosecuted by the U.S. attorney out of Denver, How convenient, So we sat down and ordered drinks, and when the drinks came, he lifted his up and said, once a Templar, always a Templar. I lifted mine up and said, he lifted his up, said, once a Templar. I smashed my glass into his. I'm surprised we didn't break the glasses. And said, always a Templar. And then he looks at, I finished it. And he looks at me, says, how did you know that toast? And I said, well, I lecture on the Templars. I go to the United Nations several times a year to give lectures on what new I have found out about the Templars. And he says, you don't know anything. Nobody knows anything about the Templars. And, I'm puffing up in anger and thinking, well, of course I do. Who do you think you are? And then suddenly this Sean Connery lookalike, small, no muscles, begins to morph. Shapeshift is what he begins to do. And suddenly, sitting there with me, I've got a blonde, curly-headed Arnold Schwarzenegger, that type of muscle when he was a muscle man, not the way he looks now. And anyway, this man, this naval officer that I had known for many years, he begins to speak. And he says, my name is Allan, and you are my other half.
Oh,
I have searched the combined universes for millions of years. Now that I have found you, no one can ever part us.
Wow.
Well, I was stunned. And the reason I was stunned...
Your eyes, he just morphed into this Arnold Schwarzenegger lookalike.
Into the Allan lookalike, yes.
Wow.
And I I was so speechless that I'm almost speechless right now as I talk about it. Now, why was I speechless like that? It was because I had been writing short stories that I knew were going to be put into a book called The Chronicles of Obregon, or the Obregon Chronicles. And I have almost a 400-page book now, over 400 pages, that is called the Obregon Chronicles. You can look it up on my site, either rumormillnews.com or Rayelan.com. And I had been channeling these stories. I thought that I was what they called a New Age channel who was channeling these stories. And Allan was the universal bad boy. It was because he had never learned love. He had never learned compassion. He did not know that the things he did to people, by cutting their arms off and gouging their eyes out, he didn't know that caused pain, because you could do it to him. He could flip his eyes out, cut his arms off. Didn't bother him any. Why should it bother humans to be treated like that? So anyway, according to the Obregon Chronicles, Allan is the one that probably brought evil to the planet Earth. And that was the man that I married. Wonderful, isn't it? Well, anyway, I was so blown away when he said, "I am Allan, your other half," that I literally couldn't talk. And when he finally shifted back into the person he was, he had grabbed the edge of the table so hard that the table was shaking. And then I threw a question at him. And the question that I threw at him was about my friend who was on trial in Denver. And I said, "If you're a U.S. attorney from Denver, then you know Richard Brennicky." And oh my God, he's already hands on the table. He's got his hands on the table, and the table is shaking. He is shaking. Suddenly, tears literally spurt out of his eyes, not run down his face. The tears spurted out of his eyes. Interesting. And I'm thinking, oh my God, he really does know Richard. Well, who is Richard? And he says, "I know Richard. Richard's my cousin. I love Richard." Wow. And they're sacrificing him. Mm. And of course, for the people who don't know what was going on at that time, there was a group of people who were charging George Bush with treason for making a deal with Iran so that Ronald Reagan would win the 1980 election and Jimmy Carter wouldn't. And so that's where we were at that time. And Richard Brennicky was one of the people that had charged George Bush with treason, and he was on trial. He was on trial for lying to a judge.
Wow.
And what was amazing is I was part of that investigation, and those papers that I had carried to Washington to give to Senator Claiborne Pell, who was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And that committee was just about to pass a yay or nay vote on Donald Gregg to be ambassador to South Korea. Donald Gregg was one of the people who had testified in court that he was walking on a beach, and he was not in Paris, where Richard Brennicky said he was, helping George Bush commit treason. Well, we brought a newsman in, and the newsman testified that it was cloudy and wet on the beach the day that Donald Gregg said he was walking on the beach. Well, anyway, Richard was exonerated. He was declared innocent. It was the one and only win in the in all of the trials for the October surprise. So my husband and I realized that we were connected in many, many different ways. And we decided to get married. Right then and there, we decided to get married. And so 2 days later, we flew to Reno. And the reason that we got married so soon is his boss told him that they had to do a complete background check on me. Mm-hmm. And that was going to take 2 solid years to do.
Wow.
And so that didn't happen. So anyway, while we were waiting to have the CIA approve us to get married,
Okay.
my husband just decided that he's got a Learjet. We're just going to take that Learjet and we're going to fly it to Reno and we're going to get married. And that's what we did. And on the way back from Reno, a funny thing happened. The pilot told my husband to come forward. There was something he needed to show him. And so instead of me staying at the back of the plane, I walked forward also. And the pilot said to my husband, a small bird has invaded our airspace. We've been ordered to arm. And I'm going, a small bird has invaded our airspace. You know, I'm kind of drunk. You know, we had a bottle of champagne that we were finishing off. You know, we'd just gotten married. And so a small bird has, you know, I was trying to figure out why a Learjet would arm to take out a small bird.
Right. It had some meaning. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, had some meaning. And then the pilot points out windows and said, look out the windows. And I saw the fuel tanks. And I had remembered that Gunter had specifically told me that those fuel tanks carried extra fuel so they could make it all the way to Europe. Well, that was a lie. He lied to me because out of those fuel tanks came Stinger missiles, one out of each tank. And then he said, the pilot said, nose cannon fully armed. And I'm going, missiles, nose cannon? What kind of plane is this?
Oh.
And the first thing that popped into my mind is I had married a drug dealer.
Okay.
That's the only thing that made any sense, is only a drug dealer would have a Learjet with weapons on it. Well, as my husband walked back to the oh, and by the way, the pilot then also said, look out the window because Nellis has scrambled a brace of fighters to take us home. Mm-hmm. Nellis Air Force Base had sent fighters to escort the bird, which the small bird was a prop job. And he escorted the small bird down and then took us home. He could have, by rights, they could have blown that small plane out of the sky because that plane was flying at the same height that Air Force One would fly. And the plane that I was in was cleared to fly at the same altitude that Air Force One was flying at. It belonged to the director of the CIA, but the director of the CIA was dead. He died in 1987. And the plane had been given to my husband. My husband was using it at that time. He was the number 3 man in the CIA. The number 3 man is the banker of the CIA, and that is exactly what he was. But he had a whole bunch of different aliases. Well, anyway, because I knew that he was my other half, Allan, I was madly in love with him, and I didn't care if he was a drug dealer or a CIA terrorist or what he was. He was my other half, and whatever I had to walk through, I had to walk through by his side. Mm-hmm. And so we came home, we got home, okay, the plane landed. Then we called it up again, and it flew us all the way home to where I was living in California. And we had a family dinner the next night. And while we were having that family dinner, about 30 armed men walked into the house. Wow. And I'm thinking, what the hell is this? Is this a home invasion? And then one of them said, this is the FBI, nobody move. And he went up to my husband and said, Gunter Rusbacher, you are under arrest. What? And he put handcuffs on him and took him out. Mm-hmm. And then the other FBI said to me, your husband is a con man on a crime spree from Missouri to California, marrying and defrauding wealthy widows.
Wow. Well,
the first thought that went through my mind was, wow, I'm not a wealthy widow. He can't be much of a con man if he married me.
Right.
And then I remembered the pilot And the pilot and he and I had carried on conversations. I knew that he and the pilot had just been in Oklahoma City. I knew that my husband, they'd played a joke on my husband and he fell straight on his head. They pulled the ladder out from under him as he was walking down the plank, landed on his head, big scab on his head. And, you know, I had heard all of the different things that they had done over the last week or two and over the last years. And so I called up the pilot and I said, talk to the pilot. He will tell you who my husband is. And the FBI agent gave me the phone and said, you call the pilot. And so I said, Don, the FBI is here arresting my husband. Please tell them you know him. And Don, the pilot, who had known my husband for 20, 30 years, said, I don't know your husband. I just met him the other day.
Wow.
When he hired the plane. So in other words, everybody is denying my husband.
Right.
And I'm thinking, oh my God, maybe the FBI is right. Then I remembered him saying, I am Allan, you are my other half. Then I remember the pilots saying, come forward, I got something to show you. And so I see the missiles and the nose cannon and the Air Force fighters, and I'm thinking to myself, how in the world can a con man fly an airplane that has missiles on the wings? And so then I called Richard Brennicke, the very man that I had asked Gunter if he knew about. And of course, to me, Richard, told me the truth. To the rest of the world, Richard lied about who he was, about who Gunter was. So I went through almost a year not really sure who I was married to. Then he gets released from the jail. He was in jail in Missouri. He gets released from the jail, and he says, I've got to go to a meeting at Offutt Air Force Base. And we have to get there immediately. The meeting's already started. So we drove straight through. We get up on Offutt Air Force Base, and there he introduces me to his boss, a covert, a Navy admiral who was the head of the covert operations in the CIA. And while we are there having dinner with his boss, two Navy captains come in and give a report about what is going on in the Persian Gulf. And he said there are, the two men said, there are many UFOs going into the base underneath the Strait of Hormuz. We believe they gave something to the Emir of Kuwait, and we believe that Saddam Hussein is getting ready to go take it. And so anyway, my husband was on Offutt Air Force Base to prep for a flight in an SR-71 to Reno, to Moscow. He flew from Reno to Moscow, along with three other planes. And they were taking a treaty to Gorbachev. And the treaty came back, signed. It was flown back to Washington, D.C. by other people. And then, I guess a day later, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and then we went to war in Kuwait. And it was all about, the treaty was with Russia, that if Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and we went in to kick Hussein out of Kuwait, that Russia would not side with Iraq. And that was what the treaty was all about. Well, anyway, while I was there on Offutt Air Force Base, not only did I have dinner with his boss and meet his two best friends, which were Navy captains, but I also had dinner with the director of Central Intelligence, William Webster. And a year later, I had dinner with the director of the FBI. But now remember, it was FBI agents that came in and told me that my husband was nothing more than a con man who had married a con man who was on a crime spree, marrying and defrauding wealthy widows. Well, you talk about egos. I mean, that was the question that got this whole conversation going. By the time that those 30 men left my home, I had no ego at all. I was a puddle of what? I was just a puddle. And I was so embarrassed. I'd embarrassed my family. I'd embarrassed myself. And the very next day, I can't remember what it was, but the very next day there was a parade in town. And I had volunteered to be, to ride on one of the floats. And so I'm thinking, here it is, my picture is front page in our local paper, and here I am riding on the float, smiling at everybody like nothing had happened. I mean, it couldn't have gotten more surreal. And it's sort of like God couldn't have thrown it at me any harder. And then dealing with lawyers and with public defenders and with prisons. By the time that year was over, I had no ego left. I barely even had a personality left. Because when you are a prisoner's wife, you are even lower than a prisoner. And everyone around you treats you that way. And so that's a pretty good story about what my ego was like. I wish we had the fellow that had asked the question to find out if he needed more.
Well, I think that he probably got the gist of it. That you certainly learned a great deal there about.
And it took. Let's see, that was the first year. We were together 9.5 years.
Yeah. And
the first year, believe it or not, was the easiest. In the second, third, and fourth years, that was when I started doing, well, I found out who my husband was. I found out that he was the pilot that had flown George Bush to the October surprise meeting, that Richard Brennecke had also, there were two planes, and Richard flew one, my husband flew the other. And I found out about that, and I was doing as many lectures as I could because prisons were trying to kill my husband every chance they could get. They were giving him the wrong heart medicine. They were, withholding heart medicine from him. They were taking heart medicine away from him that you're supposed to be weaned off of very slowly. And of course, one of the last things that they did to him was perform quintuple bypass surgery and leave him in the operating room to die. Oh. They didn't even wheel him out. They just left him there to die. He came out of the anesthesia himself, saw where he was, pulled the plugs out of himself, literally had to pull all the plugs out of himself and walk down, to intensive care. And they didn't even keep him in intensive care. Imagine, you're just coming out of open heart surgery. You're probably scared to death. You don't even know if they put your heart back in correctly.
Right.
And they leave you there because they expect you to die. So you're wondering what in the world they did to your heart that they're expecting you to die. And then they put him back in a jail cell, just a regular jail cell where people come in for the first time. That jail cell was covered with urine and feces.
Oh,
he had staph infections in his legs where they had taken out the veins to put in his heart. Right. He had staph infections in the scar over the heart. He was a mess.
No.
And that was when, and I'm a mess. I've got pneumonia at the time.
You are, yes. My question is that, our caller, Conscious, who actually asked the question, he is always giving us profound questions. But a question that he might ask is, your husband was working for the government. Why was he mistreated? So what was going on? Why was it that no one knew him all of a sudden?
This was in the Bush years, and my husband was the pilot that flew Bush to Paris to conclude the October surprise meetings.
Right.
I was part of a group that was working to expose the October surprise meetings.
Okay.
George Bush did not want the October surprise pilot anywhere near the October surprise group.
I see.
So that was what that was all about. And And then there's another aspect of my husband. My husband belongs to a group that has been in opposition to the Rothschild Illuminati New World Order since 1776, when the King of Bavaria found out about the Illuminati plot to take over all of the thrones of Europe. And of course, that has now happened, with a big war at the end of the 1800s that destroyed the Austro-Hungarian Empire, then with the World War I and World War II that pounded them back into the dirt, into the Stone Age. But the Allies, the City of London bankers that control England and control the United States and own our Federal Reserve, they told all of the royal families throughout Europe that if you work with us, you can keep your titles and your lands. If you don't want to work with us, you are in exile for 50 years. And so my husband's family, Richard Brennicke's family, and all of the rest of his cousins' families, they said, we will never work with the New World Order. And so they were sent into exile. My husband's father was a high-ranking intelligence officer for Hitler. He was also part of Admiral Canaris's conspiracy to kill Hitler and end the war. My cousin was Cordell Hull, who was Secretary of State, and Cordell Hull, in my opinion, understood that the bankers ran the United States of America, and that if an intelligence agency was formed, such as the OSS, it would be putting the bankers in charge of the intelligence. And who would they share it with? Would they share it with our generals first? No. They would look to their corporations first, and if one of their corporations might be aiding Hitler, well, then they didn't want our people to know that particular information. And so Cordell Hull had a intelligence unit within his State Department. It's still there. It's called Consular Operations, and that is the one that Mission Impossible took its theme from. Remember, in Mission Impossible, it says, and should you accept this mission, the secretary will disavow your existence. Yeah. Well, everybody knew it wasn't the director of, so it wasn't CIA, because the director of the CIA is a director, not a secretary. The only secretary we have is the Secretary of State, and that's where that Consular Operations Department is. So anyway, I found out that my husband was not only CIA, he was the son of a Austrian baron. He was the son of a Hungarian archduchess, and he was one of the people who had been given a mission, and the mission was for 1994 and 1995. Now remember, he's still in jail. He's in jail until December 1993. We get him out of jail. The minute he gets out of jail, a bunch of guys arrive with all sorts of papers and information and things, and they say, it's time for us to bring the gold back. And I'm going, what the hell are you talking about? Gold? What gold? Well, I found out that it was Austrian gold. It was gold that Hitler had stolen from the Austrian treasury and put in the Swiss bank. And during World War II, the head of military intelligence, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, made 2 trips a month from Berlin to Switzerland and then to Spain. He picked up as much gold as he could, put it into a submarine, and sent the submarine to Paraguay. And in 1955, that gold cache was discovered, so everybody went running over, and there was actually a huge battle in Paraguay that nobody ever writes about, but it would be interesting to go down there and see if there are any people that remember the 1955 battle in Paraguay. But they got the gold, they got it shipped over to the Philippines, and they put it in one of the vaults in the Philippines. The Philippines is our bank vault of the whole planet. There are a number of other bank vaults, but the Philippines is one of them. The Bermuda Circle has a few bank vaults. Malaysia has a few. I suspect that Antarctica has a few. Yes, we have treasures. Treasures that have been hidden from the Rothschilds and from the Illuminati. They've been hidden and they've been saved for the people of Earth.
Now,
And
Rayelan,
that was the last project my husband worked on.
Mm-hmm. Now that brings to mind, and it probably brings to the fore, the Templars and the connection with the Moors. Can you go into that, please?
I know very little about this, and I was hoping that you and your listeners might be able to teach me more about it. I actually talked with the man that you introduced me to, but he was not very forthcoming in the information. And I can understand why. He says he's working on something very big, and he doesn't dare say anything right at the moment. Well, I personally believe that there are more Moors in this country than we believe. And I know that the Templars learned sailing from the Moors. I think that a number of Moors were Templars, and a number of Templars embraced the Moors. And so that's about all that I know about the Moors. But, ever since I found out that one of the presidents of the United States was a Moor, and then I discovered that the legend of George Washington chopping down the cherry tree had nothing to do with cherry trees, but it had to do with chopping the Moors out of the history of the United States.
Yes.
Now, that is something that needs to be looked into, and President Obama is the one to look into that. If we have been fed a wrong history, and God knows we have, because the victors have been writing the history for the last 10,000 years. And in my opinion, everything we know is wrong. And how do we correct that? I don't know how we correct that.
Well, I would say that your program is very important. Programs like mine, programs like Occult Science, Curtis's show, are very important and instrumental in bringing people together who know the information, who can share it, so that people can begin to do their own research.
Well, the problem is I'm not so sure that any of the books that have been written, unless they're written by somebody who publishes their own books and they're just saying what they feel and what they have discovered.
Well, there are a great deal of historians out there, but as you found, some are not quite forthcoming. But,
yes, like your friend.
Yeah.
It'll be really wonderful when he has got all of his history together and is ready to go forth with that. Right. But we've got a lot of alternative historians that are going through and doing the work and showing us what is found, showing us that people lived here in the United States over 20,000 years ago, and they had the means to make things like exotic golden necklaces and things like that. So this earth, as I started off with, this earth is a school. It's been a school many, many times before, and we're coming to the end of our education. We have learned compassion. And for those who haven't, for those who are still in, we've got 7 chakras. There are 7 virtues, there are 7 vices. The 7 deadly sins, the 7 virtues. Those correspond to each chakra. Greed. Right at the moment, people are greedy, 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 greedy. Well, what is the opposite of greed? And which chakra does greed live in?
Well, I would say that I know that the compassion chakra is the heart chakra. And that's
right.
Generosity and compassion, love.
You got it.
But greed, I'm not certain. Where would that be?
It's in the heart, too. Can you believe it?
Really? So the polar opposites exist.
They're polar opposites.
Okay.
And so all of these greedy SOBs that have stolen all of our money, they're learning generosity. That is the lesson they are learning.
Certainly.
And if I could send each one of them to a court, if I could put each one of them in the place that would do each one of them the most good, I would take the person who had been studying greed, and I would send them to a country with their fortune. And what they were to do is build houses, build roads, teach people how to farm, teach people how to open up factories. In other words, go to the poorest countries in the world and teach them how to become rich and how to prosper. And of course, most of the money that they would be using to teach these people these things would be money they had stolen from someone else.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So that's what I would do with the greedy. The evil. Now, what is the opposite of evil?
The opposite of evil is the highest good. It's love. It's all encompassing.
And where do good and evil live in a person?
I would say, well, it takes me to the heart again. The heart?
Well, it kind of does. Mm-hmm. You're kind of close. So good comes from God.
Yeah.
And so good might actually be living up there at your crown chakra.
The crown chakra. And so evil is there as well.
Evil is there as well.
Okay.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Because it doesn't really seem the way that it is, the way that it should be. And maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. I definitely opened myself up to being wrong. But you see, that's why I'm so looking forward to getting my little lounge finished, so that we can have a team of us working on things like this.
That would be wonderful.
And I say, no, it has to live on the crown chakra because that is the closest to good. Good is God. It's love. Right. And that's true unconditional love coming down from God. But someone else may have a better answer. And then you've got, like gluttony, and I'm trying to remember what the opposite of gluttony is. It's when you give a lot, but there's a word for it, and I can't remember what the word for it is. But each one of the chakras has two sides, and so each one is, if the person is a glutton, they're working on whatever this other thing is. I don't have my notes here to remember. But that's, if I were the judge, I would look at them, I would see what their worst sin was, then I would find the thing that elevates that chakra to the highest. And that's what they would need to work on for the rest of their lives. And I hate to say it, but there are people like pedophiles that I probably would just shoot. Right. I shouldn't say that. But
Rayelan, it seems for me, because we both spoke earlier about our agreement that reincarnation does take place and that past lives take place, that it does happen that when a person like a pedophile that you're speaking of, something that we can think of that is just so vile and that's so awful, that they do have an opportunity in another lifetime to be that victim. And so that's where the growth and the development and the learning happens.
And that is exactly right. That's why the Marines always say, shoot them all, let God sort them out. They believe in reincarnation.
Yeah.
But there are people, the sadists, and there's no way that a sadist can be turned around except by God. And that's why some of them need to just be sent back to God. I'm not going to be, airy-fairy enough to think that, all of us spiritual people can save one of these people, because I just simply don't think we can, unless the person's a magician far better than any magician I have ever known on earth.
Right. And they have to do the work. I mean, there are
That's
no
right.
lessons like the ones that you learn yourself. No one can
Hmm.
do it for you, go in and rescue you and transform you. It has to come from within you through experience, whether it's, it happens in one lifetime or 400 lifetimes. The
Yeah,
learning does happen.
that's exactly correct. It does eventually
Hmm.
happen. And as I said, we're getting ready to go. We're getting ready to graduate, and I think it's
Yes.
probably only another 50 years that we're getting ready to graduate in. And that means that most of the souls on Earth will go to another planet. And let's just say that this school right here was teaching biology.
Okay.
And if you wanted to be a doctor, you have to go to another planet where the medical school is.
Right.
Or if you wanted to be a marine biologist, you would need to go to the school where the marine biology is going to be taught. We really don't know what this school is teaching each individual person,
Right.
but we do know that the main lesson that has to be learned here is unconditional love. Now, why does that have to be taught? Because each soul group, once our soul group gets back together, we become a force so powerful that we will have the ability to create our own universe. And if we do not have discipline and unconditional love, we could create a universe that is so powerful that it would suck all the other universes into it. And all of those soul families that had taken their time to create all the other universes, they would lose their lives as they were sucked into our universe. And so that's why we have to learn unconditional love before we are unleashed into the rest of the universe. We're young souls, very young souls. And we're here learning our lessons. Sometimes it's not very easy to learn our lessons. But we we are getting ready to graduate, and I expect that graduation is going to start somewhere around 2020. Not so much 2012. I think that's going to be a real changing point for all of us. And I think life is going to be very difficult leading up to 2012. But then something happens. I don't know what it is. Could be that energetically we're sucked into another section of the universe, which is happening. We're going to be sucked into the Milky Way. And the vibrations are going to change. And so Earth is actually going to change. The vibrations upon this planet will change. And if we can keep the Dark Lords who are here, who don't want anything to change, who want everything to remain the same, if we can keep them from, either killing off all the people that are ready to graduate or destroying the planet, I think that in about 20 years, we're in for some very, very happy times. One of the things that I saw coming is that they're going to be different. Everybody is going to be living a clean, healthy life. and that is very important, that disease is pretty much going to be banished.
Excellent.
But you're going to be able to choose what time period you want to live in. If you want to live in Egypt, you can live there. If you want to live in England of about the 14th, 15th century, peasants and kings and queens and that sort of thing, you can do that. You can choose the life that you want. There are certain people that can't choose that, certain souls, and excuse me, they will set up a way of finding those souls that will be very much like the way they found the Dalai Lama. When the souls are born that are supposed to be somewhere else, somebody goes and finds them and puts them where they are supposed to be. And there is a gigantic crystal city with an elevator to the stars. I was shown sorry, my throat's giving out on me.
Okay.
I was thrown that in Austria I was shown the blueprints for it. And that is where we make connections with our off-world family. And we take the elevator to a space wheel. I guess it's like I don't know what to call it. Oh, a space station, I guess. And at the space station, it's just like a train station. We put our ticket in to wherever we want to go. We want to go to Sirius or Orion or the Pleiades, and that's where we go. We will be able to come and go as we please. And that's not too far along down the road, about 50 years.
That sounds fantastic. From what I understand, Rayelan, that technology already exists.
It already exists, and it exists for the people who live on the moon. And I hope everybody was watching us bombing the moon the other day. And as everyone knows, nothing at all happened. It was almost like there was a huge tractor beam that grabbed a hold of our rockets and gently took them down to the surface of the moon. Nothing happened. No explosions.
It
nothing.
Wasn't allowed to happen.
Whatever our country was allowed to do, it was not allowed to happen. But what was so funny is the very day that NASA bombed the moon, Barack Obama was given the Nobel Peace Prize.
Very interesting.
And of course, NASA can't do anything without his permission. So he gave permission to bomb the moon, and the Swedes from the Nobel Committee gave him the Nobel Peace Prize. That just doesn't make any sense, does it to you?
It's just one of those things that makes you go,
It sure does.
What's really going on?
I'm going to be having a man on sometime next week, maybe even Monday. But he's one of these people that has been a mind-controlled person all of his life.
Oh, yeah.
And he's broken free from it. But during the time that he was operating as a mind control person, it was always as a very high rank in our military, either as a general or an admiral or a captain or a colonel. And even now, even though he's not active, he still has the briefings. He still has access to all of these different people, including Barack Obama. And he has some amazing things to tell about Barack Obama. And it's going to be real interesting to see how my callers react to some of these things. He thinks Barack Obama is going to surprise all of us. And he may very well do that. Right at the moment, to many people, it appears as he's surrounding himself with Marxists. And everybody is afraid that he's going to turn, everybody that calls into my radio show is afraid that he's going to turn the United States into someplace like Cuba or Venezuela. Mm-hmm. And this man says, absolutely not. You won't be able to believe what is happening. And so I'm gonna ask him back on and let him tell what he's going to tell, because I want to hear it.
That sounds wonderful. I'm knowing that I definitely want to be there. We have just a few moments left for the show, and I would just love for you to share your information about your great show, The Rumor Mill, and also your websites and how people can contact you.
Okay, the best way to find everything is just go to Rayelan, RAYELAN.com, RAYELAN.com. And then you can see there's a link there to the radio show. There's a link to the website. There's a link to the prosperity page. And there's a link to the tapes for the ACM treatment that I was taught in that out-of-body journey that I went. So just go to Rayelan, RAYELAN.com, and that's the best way to get it. Wonderful.
And this guest that you're speaking of, you're saying that he's going to be on Monday. Is there a name?
Well, I'm going to try and get him on Monday. His name is Dean, And so he doesn't have a last name, just Dean.
Right.
And so if you see on our Monday calendar on rumormillnewsradio.com that Dean is our guest, you'll know that he's the one that's going to be talking about President Obama.
Well, we'll definitely be there to check it out. And Rayelan, it has been a delight. It has been. You have just the most fascinating life, and you are just a dream, just an individual who's here sharing all of the things that you've been through. Many of those things would just crush many people, and you know that's true. So it says a great deal about you that you are standing
I was
strong.
crushed many times.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I literally would go to bed and hope to die.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, the man that asked the question about the ego. Let me tell you, my ego was killed more times than you can imagine.
Yes.
And I literally had to build myself up from the ground up. And so
here you are.
And yeah, I'm still going strong. I can't believe it.
Still are. You're inspiring others, teaching others, and a fine example for that. I thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to have you again here on Illuminations Radio.
Well, thank you so much, Tamara, and I would love to be a guest.
Wonderful.
I'd love to come back anytime.
I would love for you to. Have a wonderful evening, and I thank everyone for listening to part 2 of our show with Rayelan Allan. Good evening.